Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, our guest is Jane DeMarchi with the North American Millers Association. Jane DeMarchi has been president of the North American Millers Association since 2020. Prior to joining NAMA, she had stints with the American Seed Trade Association and National Association of Wheat Growers. Jane, thanks for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
I've reading a little bit about you, and I didn't realize, but your family's kind of been involved in this industry for a long time. Tell us about that.
We have. So it goes all the way back to my great-grandfather. So when they came to the United States, they landed in Cleveland, and they were flour distributors in Cleveland. And then my grandfather moved the business into supplying bakery equipment and pans and things like that to local bakeries. And then my father expanded that business and really started helping to build large-scale bakeries. Orlando and Cleveland was one of his initial customers, and then he grew to having business all over the country and all over the world. So when I came to DC, I was looking for a job, and NAMA was hiring, and I thought could be really cool to kind of get back into the family business while doing work in Washington. And at that time, NAMA had a great staff of people who had been around for a long time, and they taught me all about lobbying. And I've been able to, continue the family tradition of being in the baking industry. And a funny note, my son right now is working at a bakery, and we keep telling him he's got to stick with it, to keep on the family tradition.
Well, you're doing your family proud, continuing that legacy. That's great to hear. Well, we should start and let everybody know real briefly what NAMA is all about.
Sure. The North American Millers Association represents millers of wheat, corn, and oats in the United States. Also, we have mills in Puerto Rico and Canada. So we have about 40 milling members, and then another 30 associate members who are supplying equipment, fortification ingredients, and other things to the industry.
So you started for NAMA during the COVID era, and and that had to be interesting, starting your job then. Reflect back on that a little bit and the challenges you were faced with.
Well, I originally started with NAMA in 2003. So really, I came back to NAMA in 2020. And it was interesting because some things hadn't changed much, in terms of the membership and the issues that we're dealing with, but lots of things had changed. I guess I was fortunate. All the things that were associated with COVID, like the flour shortages, that had already happened by the time I started. So really, it was a matter of continuing to address the ability of our members to continue to produce as we were going into the time of vaccinations and vaccination requirements.
Yeah.
Particularly, and again, with product moving between Canada and the U.S.
And of course, the mills were considered essential functions, right?
Exactly. And, I think we still do consider them to be quite essential to the food supply. We like to say at NAMA, we're the link between grain and goodness. And I think that really is true. We're taking grain directly from farmers or from elevators and then turning it into food ingredient.
Let's get a little bit into some of what NAMA stands for and represents. Just as the National Association of Wheat Growers lobbies farm policy and working towards the Farm Bill, which we're still working towards as we record this podcast. Tell us a little bit about what NAMA's policy priorities are in regards to the Farm Bill and otherwise.
So, as I mentioned, NAMA represents wheat, corn, and oat millers. Obviously, wheat is the largest segment of our of our membership. And we have a strategic plan, and shout out to Roots and Legacies. They're based there in Manhattan, Kansas, that helped us develop our strategic plan. So essentially, we're an advocacy organization and then also very focused on collaboration. That idea, as I mentioned, being the link between grain and goodness, we take really seriously. And then also working to engage our own members. So, maybe one of the things I want to talk a little bit about before we dive into the advocacy is kind of where things are in the marketplace. We just had our spring conference. And a lot of what we talk about at our spring conference are trends and what's happening. And, what we're seeing is on the wheat flour side, things are pretty stable in terms of domestic demand. Almost all of our production is domestically used for wheat and with more specialty products. But one thing impacting all of our members, I would say in a positive way, is the increase in snacking. So we heard from the Snack Food Association, kids snack now 5 times a day and adults snack 3.5 times a day. So that is where the growth is slowing there, but it is still really impactful for all 3 of our categories. Corn, when you think of like Cheetos or other corn-based snack foods or oats, you've got bars that are frequent snacking opportunities. So I just think about that as we look at kind of our traditional partners and our traditional markets, that some of that is shifting a little bit. So back onto the advocacy side, one of the things we're watching very closely in the new administration is how FDA is going to be operating and what are their priorities going to be. And obviously things are evolving as we speak in terms of priorities, but what we're generally seeing within FDA and food safety is really been our number one priority, but FDA is now moving away from kind of its original focus on microbiological hazards now to looking at the health of ingredients like colors, additives, and food processing broadly. What is the impact and the connection between food processing and chronic disease? And we're really trying to make the point that processing is necessary, right? You can't eat raw wheat. And things like bread, tortillas, those are traditional foods that have been eaten for centuries. So hoping that we can get that point across. And then also that we need to have science and risk-based regulations, right? When you look at things like pesticides that are used on the farm, they've gone through tremendous numbers of safety reviews. The residues have been looked at and all of that. Those are priorities for us to make sure that people understand that those are safe.
Yeah, and we've talked about for years now, moving towards a cleaner label. And so that does start with flour production. But I think it's, as you mentioned, you can't overlook the importance of flour fortification. Still important for health. Is there an emphasis on that?
Yes, for sure. Making sure that enriched flour is viewed in the proper light as really the public health. Miracle might be too big a word, but things like folic acid enrichment have had a huge benefit to the population for reduction in neural tube defects over many years. So yeah, things like that, it's very important that they don't get lost. But, we do have to recognize that consumers are concerned about what they're eating, and that concern is resonating both in the regulatory agencies and then also on Capitol Hill. So there's a lot of educating that needs to be done about, what our industry is doing.
Let's talk a little bit more about the industry. Obviously, it's been around for hundreds of years and has evolved substantially since then. We talk about the milling industry in Kansas really exploding in the late 1800s with the introduction of hard red winter wheat. The milling industry looks completely different today. Fewer members, but how does that represent how many different locations are across the United States, given the smaller number of members that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you look back in history, I think there were 3,000 mills across the United States, and now we have 150 in our membership, which, is about 90% of the production capacity. Interestingly, we are seeing the development of very small localized mills, but our members tend to be more, we've got multinationals, ADM, Cargill, Pepsi, General Mills, and then also some smaller regional mills. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm excited about is we have, for some of our family-owned companies, we have now third, fourth, even fifth generation families who are running those businesses, which really points to the fact that, those companies that can evolve and modernize can really be successful for quite a long time, which is what we've seen. And, what we're seeing in the last few years is some of the older mills or older milling equipment coming offline, huge investments going in and expansion across many different companies to improve efficiency and make more, I would say even some more specialty products as well.
So some of the older mills in the U.S., I imagine some of them are here in Kansas, just over 100 years old, and the technology essentially at its base hasn't changed much over a lot of time. Some of these mills are getting closed down, and you mentioned the expansions. Where are those expansions or new mills mostly happening?
That's interesting. We've seen it in a bunch of different places. I mean, when you think about like Miller Milling is expanding down in Saginaw, Texas, and they're just opening up an innovation center down there. The Utah Flour Mill is opening up, which is a joint venture between PHM and Nippon Flour Mills in Japan, which is also really exciting. And then we've had some expansions also in the soft wheat region. So King Flour in Michigan, Star of the West is revamping their mill in Ligonier. And also Bartlett is added more capacity in North Carolina. So we're definitely seeing, as you're saying, those new mills, efficient mills coming on board. But I have been in mills where the equipment is 100 years old and they're operating just fine. So, mills are built to last.
Yeah, it's true. And they have done that for a long time. Well, so Jane, every industry faces challenges, and I'm sure your membership is no different. The margins, the cost of transportation, how they get the wheat to the mill, how they ship their flour out. What are some of the bigger challenges your members face right now?
Well, I would say for the oat industry, that's the potential risk of tariffs. Oats are heavily reliant on raw oats and processed oats coming in from Canada. Over 90% of the oats that are milled in the U.S. come from Canada. And when you talk about, as you said, low margins, 25% tariff on those ingredients is really challenging for those folks who are producing a really healthy, nutritious whole grain product. So I would say from the oat folks, it's very clear. Fortunately, on the supply chain and transportation issues, those have been better in recent years. We have had times, you mentioned you started talking about the COVID era, there was huge problems. We just almost had the rail strike. Those were very threatening times. We're also going to be circling back to the tariffs. We do have ingredients that are coming in from overseas, equipment that is coming in for overseas. So I think that hasn't hit us yet, but it's something that we definitely have our eyes out for.
What is the organic milling sector looking like? We've seen the demand over past years increase for organic supplies, and we've seen some of our large farms here in Kansas transition over to completely organic. How does the milling industry view that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think the organic sector is not growing at the rate that it was at one point. I think overall, within the food industry, it's about 10 to 12% is organic. I mean, it's interesting also when you look at something like whole wheat, which is, in fiber and things that have been recommended through the dietary guidelines, that's still holding steady at about 4% as well. So I think what we find is that consumers want choices, but they don't always spend money on those choices. as you really know, in Kansas, regenerative agriculture and an emphasis on regenerative agriculture has been a big interest of our members and of our customers in recent years. And we're not exactly sure how that is all going to play out, but certainly making sure that farming can stay competitive is really important. Wheat farming in particular can stay competitive is really important for our members.
We certainly appreciate NAMA's collaboration and some of your members like Graincraft on regenerative ag and sustainability, and it really does focus on enhancing the profitability and long-term success of farming, and I think that really does resonate. So speaking of Farm Bill policy, you folks at NAMA have worked on us conservation issues, maybe classifying wheat as a harvestable cover crop. Double crop is also very important to some of your policies. What else in the Farm Bill really strikes a chord with your members?
Some other areas that we work on quite a bit and that we collaborate with the national wheat growers and also with you guys on is research, right? And that is a part of the Farm Bill. The U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative, which is a high priority for NAMA, is authorized in the Farm Bill. Our hope had been to increase the authorization level of that program up to $20 million from 15. I think right now anything that costs money is somewhat at risk, but that has been a priority for us. Another area, again, which we've collaborated on closely is the U.S. international food aid, Food for Peace, and other humanitarian assistance. We had been working for the many years we've been working on this Farm Bill to increase the level of commodities that are used in those programs and reduce the reliance on cash. And I think what we've seen in recent months is that there is a growing interest, right, in not just giving cash, but giving those commodities. And so we're pivoting now. I would say that's still a Farm Bill issue, but it's also now an appropriations issue as we're trying to make sure that those programs are maintained in the new administration.
Speaking of research and technology, it seems that we are entering the era of GMO wheat. We've talked about on this podcast before about HB4 wheat, which is the genetically modified wheat that's grown in Argentina. That trait is approved here in the United States, will not be grown in the United States anytime soon. We say at least 3 to 5 years down the road, but it is something that we are moving down the road. So how does NAMA, from an organization standpoint, move ahead down the GMO wheat path?
Well, and as you know, I've personally worked on this issue for a long time. So it's interesting for me to watch it continue to evolve. And, I really, just stepping back for a second, I really appreciate groups like the Colorado Wheat Foundation, and I know you guys are working with them as well, who are really taking a step-by-step approach to the development of the integration of that HB4 wheat into varieties that are used in the U.S. so we can really see if the trait performs for farmers in the way that we hope it will. I mean, obviously, the drought concerns have been very dramatic for you all and for us and for our customers as well. So I think that the fact that it is a drought trait makes it quite interesting. And we're going to have to see if it can perform and be a valuable trait. Will continue to support customers' ability to choose whether that's organic, non-GMO, or GMO. And we want to make sure that those varieties really maintain the quality that we've come to expect from the hard red winter varieties. That's really quality is really table stakes for the millers at this point. We really need that to keep going. And then, at some point, we are going to have to talk about how we communicate with consumers about GMO wheat. Our research has shown that a lot of people think that biotech wheat already exists.
Mm.
So, that's an interesting part of the framework is, how do you talk about something when people already think it exists? But I think there's also a subset of consumers who are just looking for any reason to not eat wheat and wheat products. And so we have to be careful as we move forward that we don't provide more fodder for those folks.
Any industry has a good foundation of research underneath it, whether it's from farmers, the genetic part of research. What areas do the millers focus on research?
So we're very interested in supporting the genetic research that you guys need to be successful. So, at its very base, wheat research is public, either at the university level or at federally supported. And that network has been incredibly successful over the years and on, I would say, a very shoestring budget. And I think I appreciate the fact that the wheat growers, including Kansas Wheat, were just in town in DC last week for the National Wheat Improvement Committee meetings to go up on the Hill. Because I think it's just not well understood. You have corn and soybeans, which are really reliant on private sector research and companies, but wheat is a very different animal. And it's really important that we make that be known. We're also obviously very interested on the quality side of things. There are 4 ARS wheat quality labs that, again, have been really pivotal into helping breeders understand what the end use quality is of the varieties they're considering releasing. And we do really want to see that quality work continue.
We often in the industry talk about the whole grain chain, which, represents the path of that commodity all the way from farmer to miller to baker to consumer. Farmers, millers are 1 or 2 steps directly removed from the consumer. Still, we have to communicate to them. What do you think the future of the industry looks like, areas of collaboration and how we need to work together? Consumer is ever changing and ever evolving. If you had a crystal ball to look in, what do you think the next 5-10 years?
Oh, wow.
How the industry is going to have. Yeah, I always put people on the spot. This wasn't on the previous list question.
Right.
How are we going to have to pivot as an industry? Because I think you're right. You talked earlier about specialized products, specialized nutrition, and things like that. What does it mean specifically for your member, the milling industry?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I kind of look at things in 2 different buckets, right? So there's the commodity products that everybody is producing. And I think in that regard, we're going to just need to continue to be efficient, improving quality and making sure that we're able, to move products in the efficient way that we have been over many decades. But at the same time, you also have to recognize that the consumer is changing. And, well, there's not just one bucket of consumers, right? I mean, you have some consumers right now extremely price sensitive. I mean, and they're buying at dollar stores and things like that. So we need to maintain products that work for those customers. But then on the other side, there's interest in specialty and more innovative products, innovative grains and things like that. And I think we definitely have examples of companies that are working in that more specialized space and are being successful. I think of, Bay State has introduced their fiber rich in a product, which is exciting to see that movement. And we, of course, still have the Ardent Mills also has a white, high fiber white wheat product. So and maybe it's because of my age also, but I think leaning in on the fiber is going to be, an important part also, being a source of protein. But when you talk about collaboration in the industry, we have a lot of organizations that are in that grain chain. And, NAMA is one of them. And it is going to be difficult for us to maintain all of the organizations that we have without better collaboration. We just cannot afford to waste money right now. There's just not enough to go around. And then lastly, I would say, we've been big proponents and supporters of the Grain Foods Foundation. And one of the reasons why we continue to support GFF is they're coming up with the science that we need to underpin all of our communications about the health benefits of our products. And I think, I don't know, science can be a dirty word right these days, but ultimately, I think that's what we need, is to be able to prove to people that these are products that are healthy for them. I would also add that we like to think of some products as being good for your mental health also, right? That's where the cake and cookies and the other things come in, because you need that as well. You can't just eat health food. So I would say leaning in on the science and then being innovative and also being efficient with our resources is really where we need to be as a collective group.
Yeah, that's excellent points. And I'm above average on the snacking thing you mentioned and the mental health part, if it means.
There you go.
So thank you.
I'm definitely on the mental health part.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. Thank you to Jane DeMarchi with the North American Millers Association for joining me on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have a question for Jane as a follow-up, or you have a suggestion for a topic on a future episode, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. I'm Aaron Harries. Thanks for listening.